Hello, Tom. I'm good. How are you? We have a guest today. It's a guest show.
I love
Yeah, I
guest
love
shows.
guest
I get
shows
to
too.
talk
Yeah,
less.
yeah. Leah, hello.
Hello, Matt. Hi, Tom.
Hey,
We are super psyched to have you here, and we get to talk today about. And I know we've talked about this once or twice, but mental health and anything that comes out of that. So we're excited here because, quite frankly, mental health. I do not have the tidiest standards in the mental health department. I find myself often struggling with versions of this story. So I personally am super excited about this. So yeah, Leah, let's just start off. Like, tell us like who you are. Like, how'd you get here?
Ooh, okay. I'm trying to figure out which direction to take this in.
whatever direction you want.
Let's see. I'm a recovering perfectionist, right? I was a Division I basketball player. I have an intense inner critic and competitor, and I've worked hard at my own mental health, I think, as it pertains to managing all those things, and then also combating anxiety in the same breath. I like to learn by doing. I like to learn by exploring and challenging myself and taking risks. And I also love stories. So I think with all of that and feeling incredibly privileged to be around others' emotions and kind of the vulnerability that kind of led me into the profession of being a psychotherapist and anything under the umbrella of mental health and being that space creator. So I think I also wanted to be engulfed in a profession that allowed for a lot of variety. And I think mental health does that. And I've worked, in hospitals, I've worked internationally, I've worked with children, I've worked in schools, I've had my practice now, I've worked in the ER. So just that ability to be in a lot of different places and environments was very enticing for me. And it's really led me now to just becoming a private practitioner. I'm a mom, I'm a soccer coach, I'm a consultant, I'm a wife, and just allowing me again to kind of explore and create different kind of spaces. I feel like this profession has really challenged me, but allowed me to just also be the various parts of me. So hopefully.
Sure. So yeah, out of the gate, I mean, let's talk for a second about D1 athlete. I mean, that seems pretty intense, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think that is an interesting springboard for literally everything you said after that. but let's start there. Do you think kind of prime the pump for sort of mental imbalance or like, I mean, it kind of feels like that's not necessarily the healthiest.
It's a ton of pressure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could take that both ways. And I think that's why it's been such a huge part of my life, just athletics in general, because I think it primed me for so many things and helped me have that grit and resilience and get so many reps, not just physically, but mentally. But then on the flip side, there were a lot of just hurdles, emotional and mental hurdles that were just debilitating in some respects to some level. But again, I feel like I got a lot of those reps in at a young age, which has really helped me now to be a better clinician and friend and just person and individual based on all the things I kind of went through in that realm.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to actually ask about that. Like, do you feel like that sort of intensity kind of helped you sort of either empathize more with who you're dealing with now, or just sort of understand in general a little bit more about where they might be coming from?
Oh yeah, and I love. I mean, one of my specialties is working with athletes, and so I love that. Just it's amazing how athletes, of course, everybody's different, has different backgrounds and different struggles, but some of the talk and the jargon and the hurdles, it's like, you hear it time and time again. And then of course I can resonate with it as well. So it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. You could probably jump in with a couple of anecdotes when you're talking to somebody, be like, oh, when I did this other thing. Right. Like, and I'm sure that's tremendously comforting on the other side to be like, oh, shit, yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Having the experience.
Yeah, right. Oh, look, I'm not.
Same thing.
Yeah, totally. So cool. So you recover from all that and integrate it in, and so did you go to university for psychology? Is that your background? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So you were learning this stuff as you were experiencing it. That must have been fun. You're your own petri dish. Yeah. So
we're big on N of
one.
Here,
yeah.
So it's
the podcast really should just be changed to the name to N of one. Like, it's really we really are huge believers in that. But yeah, so okay, so you're through college and you're out. Like we noticed you were a blogger for was it Psychology Today, or was that what did I get that right? Yeah. So like, how do you get into something like that? I mean, that seems like you get to have a good experience, like a broad background in doing that, right?
Right. And honestly, Matt, I think things like that, like whether it's with Psychology Today, whether it's with, kind of helping out with articles with Newsweek, whether it's some of these big things that I feel like had the privilege of doing, a lot of that I think does stem from what I learned early on and as an athlete of just like, you have to take risks. Like you have to just kind of jump in sometimes, and you just have to put yourself out there, and things will start to cultivate, or it'll push you in a direction that it'll start to come together. So I think a lot of my risk taking, I think a lot of my like, I want to try to live up to that challenge, or I want to do that. I think that comes from kind of my history and my past.
Sure.
Being an athlete.
Yeah. I always like when I get to talk to people with experience like those things, because they are diverse. They're in platforms that change quickly. There's a lot of new information coming out across the board. So like having fluency, I guess, to be able to keep up at that level, I always like, because that means people are paying attention to not just what they learned in school and like, this is it, and I'm in a fixed mind, and I think that we see that a lot, right? I mean, Tom and I have had 100 conversations on this where you hear somebody's opinion on it and you're like, well, that was true, like, 5 years ago or something, but like this, it clearly demonstrates that you have not evolved past that. And like that and it gets you tied up in all kinds of ways. Right. So it's always nice to see people kind of going on. So speaking of that, I actually wanted to talk about, it seems like you've got a new thing with performance and whatnot. I just wanted to kind of talk about in general, like how do you see your evolution happening? Like, is there a North Star that kind of has been pulling you through your journey, or are you just sort of like, I found this new thing and I want to dive full in and I'm off to the races over here now? Like, talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I have to sometimes rein it in, my tendency to chase shiny things. Like I have that, and so I have to
we know nothing of that here.
Well, both of us have paid quite a bit of money to other mental health care professionals for that exact reason.
My CPA actually has a line item for Matt's weird stuff. Like it's something like that. And it's basically, it changes every year, but it's like, it's a coach, it's a psychotherapist, it's whatever, but it's this other category that just is perennial, right? It's a what did we donate to that this year, Matt? I'm like, yep.
I just make it all business expenses.
Course, yeah.
No, I think a lot of it too is just, being, as I kind of moved through different levels of being in mental health, whatever capacity I was serving other people. I think when I got to the point where I was, just running my own practice, I missed collaborators. I missed my team. I missed colleagues. I missed that. And so that really led me, probably, I guess it's been 5 or 6 years now, to where I want to work with groups. I want to speak. I want to help on more of a macro level. And that, really, I think fits in nicely with the micro level of just in the intimacy of therapy. So I set out to kind of find that. And that was, through speaking, that was through facilitating wellness workshops, that was through consulting, that was through, leading women's groups. And I think just those things have helped me feel, more connected on a broader level. So I think that wasn't really my motivation, was just, I need connection in a different way, and I want to share and educate in a different way.
Yeah. And it's funny to see that in those two aspects, right? You mentioned the intimacy there, right? There is a connection, right? And I'm sure when somebody comes in and they're in your sweet spot as a client, right? You have that rapport, maybe they're an athlete, and then to pull it back and be that group facilitator, where you see this interplay of people's personalities in the group. It is pretty dynamic. We see that in acupuncture, if it's one-on-one treatments versus community acupuncture. There's a different vibe, and I would argue both are very important.
I bet. Oh, that's fascinating. That kind of reminds me too of just even like yoga classes. Like you have that yourself, but then when you're doing yoga with other people, there's this energy that you can't replicate with sometimes when you're just doing it on your own or in front of a screen.
And my wife thought I was insane, but in COVID, I signed up for a yoga class online, and I quit after I quit. I didn't stop paying for it for another year, because I was like, no, if I keep paying for it, it'll make me go back. But it was it was just, you're missing that sort of third eye situation, like it's just not, there's a piece missing and I can't put my finger on it, but it just wasn't the same, at all. And she's like, you're a crazy person. I'm like, no, I'm serious. I'm telling you, when you're doing this, when you're doing this with other humans, there's like a shared energy that you all are benefiting from. So it's like me as on my mat, but it's us on our mats, like it's, yeah. But yeah, I think there's a lot of things like that I think that we are all missing. And actually that might be an interesting side question. Like when you see that missing, I mean, how do you think that contributes to sort of degradation of mental health, right? Like, I mean, I didn't do yoga for 3 years. So like, and that was tremendously hurtful to me mentally, right? Like I didn't, not in a punch you in the face kind of way, but almost like a punch you in the face kind of way, right? It hurts.
Absolutely. I think and that could be a whole topic in itself, because we have, this technological advances and all the things. And even what we're doing right now, this is fantastic because we can connect and not be in the same space. But if most of our connections are like in this form, or they're not that authentic, in that space where you can have that real energy exchange on every level. I mean, we're feeling that emotionally and mentally and emotionally, we're feeling that depletion, and it's almost like we're scrambling for this connection, but we're longing, and we're doing it in forms that are easy and not really filling all those spaces that we as humans are wired to feel. So that's a major issue, especially with our youth.
So what do you think, kind of follow up on that? We're seeing this trend where COVID hit, everybody flipped the switch, went telehealth. What are your personal thoughts on online counseling?
Yeah, great question. And just even if I, talk about me in that way for a minute, man, I had such fatigue and like such my own journey with, once COVID hit, I was never in front of a screen all day, never. I mean, I did my billing, I did my writing, but it was like I was with people, and normally not in front of a screen, and normally not sitting the way I did. And man, when COVID hit, it was fantastic to be able to reach my clients and reach people, and the accessibility of, and that's still a major pro. But just being in front of a screen, losing the nonverbals, losing the energy, just all of that was very hard, I think, in some respects for clinicians, because it's so important how someone enters your office. It's so important what they're wearing.
That's interesting.
Covering themselves, their shoes, how they're doing, where they sit, how they sit, what they do, and their nonverbals and all their body language is so, especially when you're meeting for someone for the first time. Those are all part of our assessments. And a lot of that was lost. And I think too, as clinicians and just anyone that switched their profession to a lot of online, we're prone to distractions. We are more prone to multitasking and kind of, that takes away from that space creation that we do for our profession. So on one hand, it's an amazing thing. I love, I'm in the office Monday, Tuesday, seeing clients in person, and I'm still virtual most Thursdays and Wednesdays, but it's nice on those Wednesdays and Thursdays to, I throw a little laundry in, or I can do this or that.
Yeah.
It's also multitasking and pulling away from my role in this.
And it's funny with this whole TikTok conversation that's going on right now about, banning and whatnot. It's funny. I'm my, I guess, position with my kids who are 14 and 11. So they're old enough to know what they're talking about and young enough to not know why they're saying what they're saying. And they're viscerally reacting to the possible notion that TikTok could go away. And I said, it's because you guys are in this like constantly distracted state. And so what you're not seeing is that for those of us who didn't have to grow up constantly distracted, life is different when you can just focus and you could be present. I mean, how many adults do you know that struggle and probably pay you through the nose to be more present? I mean, it's like, oh my God, like, I mean, this is like some radically new concept for most adults, but to kids, it's like, what the hell are you talking about? I'm present. I'm here. I'm sitting right here. You're like, you haven't been here in 2 years. You're
attention is currency now.
And so it's just interesting that this topic keeps coming up over and over again. I'm like, yeah, it's great. I can be on Zoom all day, but I still have to check email. Usually I cut my teeth in Manhattan. I'd have a subway ride from one meeting to the next, where I can get my shit together and just collect myself and, mentally, physically. And then I had a Palm Pilot back in the day, and I could like queue up a couple emails and like get out and send it when I got to the top of the subway. But like, even those breaks aren't happening anymore. I mean, my average right now is 10 Zoom calls a day. 10 is like my average. My high water mark was 15 last week. And I'm like, how do you get anything done with 15? I'll tell you how to get done. You just spend your life in a state of distraction. You're on a Zoom call, but you're like, oh, but I'm typing an email. I can respond into a Slack. I'm hitting mute on the mic and my video to yell at my kid who's doing something stupid. It's like, but the person I'm talking with does not have my full and undivided attention, not even close. So everybody gets the short straw, it's, so I don't know. It is, I don't know how you guys deal with it. I mean, must be tough from your side,
Well, and you make some excellent points. And I think you nailed it. It's just where we're kind of training and retraining our brains for that, like operating at a high level of urgency, operating at like, we need all this stimulation all the time. And we have too much on our plate, but we are constantly interrupted when we do try to sit down and do something. And I think especially for our youth and even as adults, when we do have that calm, and if we do have that space where it's like, wow, nothing's really occupying this, that's generally when anxiety moves in, because we've suppressed it, we've distracted all the feeling, all the things. They're there and they need a release. Typically it comes out at night because our mind is shut off, or it's when there's a lull in kind of our rapid pace. And then that's a lot of times when people come and see me, they're like, I can't focus on anything. And I'm like, okay, well, you've trained your brain to do that for the last few years. Well, and then it's almost like, and I get these panic attacks or I get these bursts of anxiety. And it's like, well, your internal balloon is too full. You're walking around with a full balloon, and that last puff of air might seem very insignificant in isolation, but man, it's been growing for a while. And your pop looks like a panic attack. It looks like that adult tantrum that you have on your kid. It looks like whatever, because we are not transitioning well, to your point. We are not carving out that time for reflection and being deliberate with letting the air out of our own balloon. It's normally multitasked. And self-care in general, I mean, one of the things I really talk about a lot is people can Google and know a list of, everyone pretty much can name, these are the 10 things you should do for self-care. Take a bath, go for a walk, all those things. But great, those are great things. But the self-care that really makes a difference is when it is not multitasked, when it is something that's like you're clearing the clutter, you're letting that air out. And that could be just going through your senses and understanding, well, this is my current environment. This is me. This is now. And this is, what I feel. And this is what my body's picking up. Like, that is self-care. It's been so misconstrued now that everyone's like, oh, well, I'm on a treadmill and I'm eating chocolate cake at the same time. So I'm killing two birds with one stone. It's like,
Yeah, no, absolutely. But it's so funny though, because like we talk a lot about that here, Tom and I, and about, these sort of daily routines. Right. And some of the stuff, like I do Qigong in the morning. I don't do a lot of it. I do like maybe 12 minutes, 12 minutes. And then I do a 20-minute meditation session. But even my meditation, I'll tell you, I was doing it physically. I mean, I had a timer. I was sitting in a quiet spot. I was doing all the things. But I noticed that my brain was essentially rolling through all the to-do list. It was rolling through. And, we all expect a degree of distraction during meditation. Anyone who's done that more than 0 times knows that you're going to be distracted at some point. But that was the rule, not the exception at a certain point. I was like, all right, what am I doing? I'm essentially just ruminating, sitting still, and I'm not in front of a computer. So I guess there's that, but this isn't really helpful. So I actually had to take control of that and switch. And now when I meditate, I have to do one of those like explore each body part meditations where you start at your toe and kind of move up, mostly to keep my shit in order. Like, cause otherwise I am floating around like a lunatic. Like, I mean, thank God that's not a film, because people will be like, what is going on with this guy? Like, I mean, it's a mess, but it's like, it seems like unless you take control of that and accept that it's like an actual thing, because it sounds a little woo-woo. Wait, you want me to think about my toe? Like, what the hell are you talking about? Right. I mean, I don't know. A lot of this stuff feels weird. Like, it sounds weird. We've been trained to perceive it as oddball Like only hippies do that. I mean, I can't tell you. Yeah. You know, I mean, Tom, I know most of my friends think I'm a complete lunatic.
I mean, you should have just become an acupuncturist.
Yeah.
I'm as middle of the road as they come for acupuncture. And if I talk to anybody else, they're like, this guy's fucking.
Yeah. Right. Well, and Tom, that's right. I mean, Lee, when Tom gets going about meridians and chakras and stuff, I mean,
no chakras. That's a different system. That's a different part of Asia.
Right. See, and God forbid you use the wrong.
And I get pissed off when people do that.
Yeah. So, but you know, Tom's really good at what he does. But I think to his point, a lot of people think it's a little woo woo. You know. So that's a great little thing to ask you about, like mental health. I mean, I'm a product of I was born in the late 70s, so I was an 80s kid, square down the middle, right? If you talk to somebody in the 80s and said I was going to a psychiatrist, they'd be like, "What are you, fucking nuts?" Like, you know,
you were,
like there was no
you were labeled.
It was like Scarlet Letter time, right? Like, oh, that guy's obviously crazy. Like, how have you seen that evolve, you know, specifically post-COVID? I mean, have we kind of gotten over a lot of those, or what are we?
It's really continued and began even before COVID and really got some momentum with just, we're trying to erase those stigmas. They're still there, of course.
Right.
But I do think, just for me, like even being on LinkedIn or being on places and talking with professionals and corporate, some of the jargon and some of the words that are being used are clinical words that is very encouraging for me to hear. A lot of times they're misused, but just the way that we're talking about things and just kind of using them in more mainstream conversation, I think is great. So I think it's looked at more in the 80s. You're absolutely correct. And even before, it was like, oh, what's wrong with you? Where now a lot of times we look at mental health, we look at going to therapy, we look at doing other things like that as maintenance, as just a way to take care of yourself and looking at it as a process and living proactively rather than just always reactively. And I think that's been a big shift too.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, we put my 14-year-old in therapy every other week for an hour just to kind of, because we felt he was having a little bit of an issue attaching to emotions, you know, like he felt really distant. And but that first one was literally like, he was almost in tears as we're in the elevator going to his office. He's like, I don't want to do this. Like, I'm not doing this. He was like, hell no, it's not happening. You know, so whatever is there on his side, I think his group kind of seems to still hold that in not so high regard, like not in maintenance. Like my parents are punishing me. They're not, you know.
I'm wondering how much of that is the stigma versus how much of that is him going, oh, something's wrong with me. Because I know that's been a key thing with one of my daughters is, well, there's something wrong with me then.
Right.
You know, and well, you're having an issue and we want you to get the help. And it's funny because now parents, you know, we stand outside at pickup and it's like, oh, my kid's on this and this and this, and they're seeing so-and-so over here and we're doing this with them. And I'm glad that's changed. I don't know, you know, and this is, were we different then when we were growing up, or did we just not pay attention to it is my question now. You know, I think that's an interesting, like, oh, we were all screwed up when we were younger, but we just weren't talking about it.
I mean, we had,
you know,
we had that conversation a while back about the ADHD prognosis, right? Like, so it's like, how many kids, they're like, oh, ADHD is blown up. I'm like, well, here's the question. Has it blown up or has it been there all along? We just didn't have a label for it. Like, I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, I was shaking my leg every class, staring out the window, wondering what the hell I was getting up, you know? And you know, now looking at my kids, I'm like, they're just doing what I did. It's just now they got to take Adderall. Accepted that you're going to get some medication.
Right. Which, I mean, and I took Adderall for 28 days, 29 days. And I was like, all right, for day 1, 2, 3 was awesome. I was like, this is the best thing ever. Day like 18, I'm like, this is torture. Like, I can't, like, I spent 40 years of my life like not needing that or needing it, but not having it. And I was like, the lattice work I built to circumvent these deficiencies, whatever you want to call it, or these realities, I'm way happier with those than with this wacky sort of cloak that I'm supposed to pull over my, you know, I it did not go well with me. And I'm like, we're doing this to our kids, like on the regular. This is nuts.
Well, yeah, and you built, I mean, even for decades, you identified behavioral patterns within yourself. You gained coping skills and you gained resilience. So I think that switch of like, well, I'm going to try this, Adderall and your first few days, like you said, I was like, yeah, this is great. Really good, or whatever happened.
On day one, I was like, this is amazing.
I'm glad I tried Adderall one day and I focused on my anxiety, and I'm like, I'm in the car with my wife. I'm like, I'm super dialed in right now, but we're fucking doing this to our kids. This is horrible.
Here's the thing too, which again, to your point, like it's so great that it's being talked about, but I find too, there's this fine line, and a lot of times I put myself in this role to help differentiate this. Of there's this fine line of like, especially parents coming in and almost like being hypersensitive and with this motivation to like shield their kids, have a diagnosis, have an umbrella, have it all make sense, have it. And it's like, okay, but we have to also, we don't need to put it in a box all the time. We don't need to label it. We don't need to like make it something that becomes a shield for people to hide behind or make an excuse behind. Right. And that's where, when that happens, a lot of times that's when we lose the ability to create those spaces for our children to gain reps and gain resilience and figure out how to work through it. And that's one of the biggest things that I'm seeing. And when you talked about your child going in therapy and kind of being in the elevator, like, I can't do this. I think that's another thing too, where it's also therapy in general. I think it's such a practice of vulnerability, right? Yeah. That's a scary thing in general. And a lot of times based on how we tend to communicate, especially how our kids communicate, how we can distract, how we can move out of things and not sit with discomfort. Therapy challenges all of that.
All of it, yeah.
Incredibly, intimidating. And that's something too in the first session, especially with teens, when I had this, they're incredibly, just reluctant, which makes sense, but kind of squashing through that. And to your, like, letting them know there's nothing wrong. Like, you're not walking in here and I'm like, oh, this person is completely screwed up. It's like, you're going through something just as you would physically.
Sure. Yeah, and I remember one of the most bizarre moments of my childhood is I was getting my first like teenage physical with my pediatrician. And again, this is in the 80s. Nobody talked about anything. And he goes, listen, have your parents talked to you about masturbation? And I was like, what the fuck did you just say? He goes, I just want to let you know. And this is all he said on it. I just want to let you know that it's totally normal. It's totally okay if you're doing it. It's totally okay if you're not doing it. If you have any questions, you could just ask me. And that was it. That it's as far as he went.
That's the best way
and I
to
was
do
like,
that, though.
What just happened? Like, I felt like a truck ran me over because like at no point in any of my rest of my life had anybody ever said those words to me. And I was like, after that point, I never talked to him about it. I didn't schedule time to like discuss masturbation with him, but I was like, there was almost like a permission note was given now to like not think of this in such a weird spot. And I think that's what happened with our son anyway. And I suspect with many of your teens is like, once they get over that initial, like, what just happened? Like, I just came to this thing that's got me completely out of my comfort zone. I don't know what's going on too. The second session, the guy found out that my son knows how to solve a Rubik's Cube pretty fast. He can do it in about 35 seconds. And they spent a whole like session talking about Rubik's Cube and relating it back to various things. And I said, man, there's something to be said about a really in tune practitioner, like somebody who could just dip into that frequency real fast like that and just sort of meet him where he's at is like really amazing. Like, but even that word, meet me where I'm at, that sounds crazy, like to people who don't know what that means, right? But so when you're working with people and you do get over that, do you find that people just sort of like unleash because they need to pop that balloon and they're just not, now you give them a vehicle to do that? Like, do they just sort of explode? I mean,
it really does. Like, it's this delicate process,
ripping off the
right?
Band-Aid.
And so, but yeah, you do. And you see it in different forms. You'll see it where people will just rapidly speak and like almost like they're just, you can see everything getting cleared out with their speech and it's kind of all over. And that's just they're externally processing and almost like, letting that air out. But You'll see some people just be more deliberate and delicate. You'll see some people become incredibly vulnerable, and then the next session come in almost like they're like, wow, I did all that. I feel weird. I need to assess how you.
Right. I got to walk this back a little.
Yeah. So it's just fascinating. But I think that's too, just, you know, as a clinician, it's really, I coined myself, and this is kind of the essence of my book, is it's just like, you're a space creator. Like, you are creating that space, me dictating. Of course, I'm going to challenge. Of course, I'm going to ask questions that are going to hopefully provoke and peel back some of those layers when appropriate. But like, I'm meeting you where you're at. I'm letting you have that control while you're exploring parts of you that maybe have never really been uncovered for years or ever. So it's this really delicate process that differs from person to person. But, you know, if you're doing it for a while, there's so many parallels. We're all wired very similarly in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I love your use of words, because I feel like one of the for sure lost art forms, I think, in the social media age is the ability to use the right word, even though 8 words might be applicable. Like, there's a word that gets across the real essence of that. And like, you use phrases like get reps in. I know that's a uniquely sports related thing. And maybe because Tom and I are both have sports backgrounds as well, I maybe that's why it resonates, but it is so absolutely perfectly articulated to what you're talking about, right? Like, you gotta do it once, 25, 100 times. Like, you got to keep doing it, or else you're just sitting cross-legged on a couch meditating, thinking about what you're cooking for dinner, right? Like, I mean,
but isn't that it? Everything is practice, right? All the skills we have, all the resilience we develop. That's
no,
practice.
Of course. Yeah. It's and then the space was the other one that you used several times. I mean, when I first got introduced to that was in yoga practice, when they say, you know, we're going to hold space for this. And I was like, like, I'm literally going to block out a physical space and I'm going to do this. And then physical space became mental space. Like, I'm in yoga class, so I'm not going to think about my next Zoom call or my next anything, really. Right.
That's beautiful.
Was that Ram Dass book, Be Here Now?
Yeah. I haven't read that, but yeah, you've mentioned that before. Yeah. But it's tough, man. I mean, when you're sitting there, I mean, I guess in yoga, it's a little easier. You know, you're trying to hold crow pose or something. It's challenging. You're not really, you don't have like a lot, you know, of mental bandwidth outside of that. But if you're just doing tree pose, yeah, you could, you know, or mountain, you know, like, you're just like, you could start thinking about a whole bunch of stuff if you're not careful. Right?
Yeah.
So I guess the performance thing, I wanted to talk about that. What got you? I mean, is that just like a comeback around the mountain to athletics again? Is that?
Yeah, I think so. And I think just even performance with, you know, kind of leaders, you know, I love working with leaders. And, you know, my big thing now too, especially with the consulting piece, is just how do you integrate wellness into your culture, right? And what does that mean? And that looks very different for different companies, just like as individual therapy looks different for every individual. And so I think that, you know, that really just, that's kind of that essence of how do we create that space? How do you create that space as a leader? How do you do this? And that performance. And I think that self-awareness piece that a lot of leaders have in so many ways, but a lot of them just charge forward with trying to support, or not support, rather solve, and kind of fly at the seat of their pants. And it's like, how do we lead and demonstrate things that we're doing and practicing that presence and that grit when we need it, but that recovery when we need it. And that just radiates through an organization.
I mean, there's got to be about an infinite number of parallels between a top level athlete and like a CEO, or, you know, like, I mean, it pretty much all of the things are the same.
It's the drive. It's everything. It's the ethic. Right. It's the perfectionism, I'm sure, too.
That inner critic. I mean, that intense inner critic. And again, like, that serves people well in a lot of ways. It's that motivator. It's that, you know, it keeps you grounded. It keeps you steady. It keeps you focused. But it can be incredibly sabotaging, right? If it's not acknowledged, or if you don't learn about it, if you don't use it to your you know, basically your advantage, it can just blow you out of the water.
Well, you started off by saying you were a recovering perfectionist. Like, what were, I mean, you know, these people that you're talking about and you're describing here, I mean, they almost rely on that perfectionism to make them good at what they're doing. Like, how did you sort of carve out a balance between those, like outcome and obsession, right?
Oh, that's a great question. You're absolutely right. It does make you good at what you're doing, but what it does is it almost keeps you singularly doing that thing. And
Sure.
so it's not fulfilling with all the other parts of who you can be and who you want to be. Relationships suffer. Your wellness may suffer. Other things may suffer because there's just not enough. I keep saying space, but there's not to kind of do all that. So it's being able to use that to be productive and focused in one part of one role of who you are. But that's not sustainable. It's like, someone who's just like, I'm going to run, 100 miles every day. It's like, wow, that's amazing. But how long are you going to be able to do that before an injury, before something happens? And then what do you have left over?
Right.
You've been nurturing those other parts of you simultaneously in some ways, because that's when we feel disconnected. That's when we feel like, what the hell am I doing? That's when we feel like I've worked so hard, but I still feel empty. Like, that's when that happens.
Yeah.
That's the burnout.
And that's the yeah, exactly. Cause I think the what's left over is like a very interesting concept, because I spent probably the bulk of my 20s and 30s not giving two shits about what's left over and just kind of going all in. And like, my 20s, I had the physical resilience to work through that. So there was no big deal. In my 30s, I had small kids and it was a little harder, but I could still pull it off. But 40 came along, and I wouldn't say that I I still have energy, everything's fine, but it's a different kind of energy. So I don't have the resilience to be able to go bull in a china shop like every day of the week like I used to, right?
Yeah.
Last night I got done. I was like, I'm going to go write a couple more emails, but I'm like, fuck that. It's 10:30 at night. Like this shit will wait. I can't,
I'm wondering how much of that is fatigue and how much of that is wisdom.
Well, that's kind of what
right. That's always sound like, am I just tired, or am I being, useful or conservative of my energy?
And I guess we could ask that question about all the things we're talking about here, because it's kind of like, is it wise to be like, I need to meditate in a more deliberate way to get what I need to get out of this?
I think if you see the value in the practice, that's where it becomes.
Yeah. And that's why I kind of like always, I love people who are clinicians, because I would love the opportunity to kind of like peel this back with a huge group of people over a long period of time, because we are all just sort of chemistry sets, right? And we can play with, I love watching. And that's kind of what got us into this show, is like exploring how people do things and react to things that are all related to what we all care about, which is health and longevity. And Tom and I make a joke all the time. We only talk about this because none of us want to die. We just want to live forever.
It's very funny. Speaking of hanging on diagnoses, a while back, a friend of mine, I was talking with a PA, and I was Matt didn't like the joke I made, which was like, yeah, sure, we might be able to live forever, but do you really want that? Yeah, and I was speaking with a friend, and I'm like, look, I'm not depressed, I'm not sad, I'm not going to hurt myself, but isn't there something more, right? And I think that was I'm dissatisfied, right? And then she goes, oh, we call that passive suicidal ideation, and I'm like, I don't think it's that far, but if I punch the clock out now, I would say, had a good run.
Right.
And, at the same time, there's a laundry list of things that I think, and I think as entrepreneurs, as all of us are, it's like, no, I got to get all this shit done. There's all this other stuff.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what what I was saying is like, if I lose the perfectionist in me, then I stop wanting to do those things. Right. Like, and I'll be honest with you, not going upstairs last night and writing those extra emails, there's a part of me that's like, you're a failure. That you fucked up. Like you could have done better. You didn't. That's a failure. And, maybe it's a couple extra glasses of wine or something, which admittingly is not the healthy way to do that. But I have to actively, aggressively sometimes tamp that part down, because otherwise it's just being like, you're a failure. You're a jackass. Like, get up there. Like, I'm not, I can't. Stop talking.
Absolutely. That's the part you have to, that's the hardest part. I mean, even too, just physically, now in my 40s too, it's like, would I love to go out and train the way I did in my 20s, I would. Yeah. And I'd love to go out, and I really enjoy running, but my like hips scream at me if I do it too often. And just where I'm like, ugh, and I get so frustrated. And of course my inner critic is like, well, you let yourself just not be able to do that anymore.
Right.
And you need to go do this. And you're not truly training and truly in shape if you can't do this. And, that's there. And that's that like nagging perfectionist of like, if you can't do it this way, then you just might as well just throw in the towel.
Then you might as well not do it at all. Yeah.
But I've had to really work at like, okay, what's underneath all of that, Leah? And really what's underneath all of that is like my medicine. And part of what really keeps me feeling confident and good is having some sort of exercise or activity in my life. And I need to be smarter about it and self-aware about it and give myself that grace too, in the same breath of like, I know when the hell to push myself, but I also know like, you know what, your body is giving you all the signals and has for a few days that like that run is not going to really be a great thing for you. And so calm your damn ego down. And today you're going to do some biking or you're going to do some stretching, but still checking that off in my mind of like, wow, I listened to myself, but I also didn't like surrender and I didn't take the easy way out, but I also listened and was truly honored where I'm at. And that to me, it was a huge growth because it was not like that ever. I mean, I remember my first yoga class, I think after I played, Division I basketball, been like blood, sweat, and tears type of athlete. And then I went to a yoga class, and I think I actually had on basketball shorts, and the lady was like, really, who are you? What are you doing? I could barely touch my toes because I was so tight from all the weightlifting and all the things. And I remember in that class, and I was like, wow, this, number one, is too slow for me. I'm not sweating. I don't even know what the hell I'm doing. But I looked at everyone else around me, and they're, contorting their bodies in all these ways that I couldn't even begin to do. And I identified that more of like, actually, that's probably not a good thing that I'm like 23 and I can't touch my toes. That's probably not great. Yeah. And so this, I could look at it as like, this isn't for me. This is wimpy. Or I could look at this as like, this is actually a challenge in a completely different way. And I think that, just reframing some of those things has been incredibly helpful.
I think it's funny that you did that. You're like, new challenge. I'll take you on, yoga.
But isn't that what a D1 athlete would do too? Like, fuck it, I'm gonna figure out this thing.
Buy some leggings because that's what everyone has on. I guess that's what you do.
You gotta look the part.
Buying the gear is like 50% of the fun. I mean, of starting a new one. You're like, I got to get a bunch of new stuff. This is cool.
I particularly love this part of the conversation because we're taking somebody from the realm of mental health who has accomplished so much physically, and you're really demonstrating that interconnectedness, right? Because sometimes we'll grant ourselves a little bit more grace when it's something physical. Like I can't do that right now. My hip hurts. But we won't do that when you're like, look, I don't have the heart for that today, right? No. Get up, pussy, or whatever it is. Yeah, and it's when we unite those two, that's where we see that, hey, they're really interconnected, right? When we use words like a physical word, like, I'm holding space for a mental concept, right? And I'm bringing that back to Chinese medicine, right? Everything's energy. It's just the density of it. Yeah, so, you want physical, it's just really dense energy. Everything else is out here, right? Emotions, but I think that's so cool to hear that. And I think, Leah, we didn't ask your name of the book, and I think you should plug that.
I'm sorry, what did you say? I missed that.
We didn't ask the name of your book or anything, so you should definitely plug that.
This is the first time, and this was my vulnerability at work. I am almost done with it, so it's not even out yet. Okay. But I am actually, I think the title, and I've gone back and forth with this, but I think it is going to be How to Be a Space Creator. And I know that sounds abstract, but like it's all about too my concept of like supporting people rather than solving for people and creating a space and that deals with intrinsic burnout and compassion fatigue. And it's all about that space.
It's all about the space. And you know what's funny? You almost apologized. I don't even know if you noticed you did this, but you almost apologized for using space again. And I was like, and I almost mentioned it, but you were on a roll. But that's what I find with my kids, especially, and they're my petri dishes, like for being a better human being. If I use like a word over and over again and they're not getting it, I'm like, look, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I'm going to beat this drum until you're on the rhythm, right? It's space. It's space. The answer is space. There was a Friends episode where Joey had a gallstone, and he's like, "Oh, you have a gallstone." He goes, "Or it could be this." He goes, "Or it could be a gallstone." Like, and he just kept. It went in like 3 or 4 different directions before he's like, "Or it could just be a gallstone." And I feel like I'm having that conversation a lot with people where you're like, "I'm just going to keep saying this gently and empathetically, but I'm going to keep saying it until it absorbs. You need to integrate this."
Yeah.
One thing you do, and I definitely, before we let you go, I definitely want to talk about it, and I love it. And I've commented on a couple of them, but these little tip Tuesdays, I think you call it, Tuesday tips or whatever it is, I dig those in such a big way. Mind-bendingly difficult, abstract concepts. They're, the one that I just read before here was the bookmarks or bookends, I think you call it, right? I mean, my AM bookend is this Qigong meditation thing, but when I read yours, I was like, I don't have a PM one. And and that's information, right? I don't know what I'm going to do with that yet, but it's like, you know what? This little adjustment to a system I'm already mostly deploying makes a lot more sense. It's like, oh, yeah, thanks for telling me about that, right? Like, it's not, and I really think that that's the stuff that we're all missing, is these little digestible, actionable things, right? I mean, and Tom and I, we joke about these health gurus out there. They're like, "Oh, I do this, that, the other." We're like,
yeah,
we added up. We're like, I have a 29.5-hour daily routine.
There's 3 hours in the sauna, and then a 2-hour yoga plunge, and then
you're like, yeah, okay. Yeah, and right. Adding up all those things, you're like, carry the one. That's $225,000,
and still found time to post 20 times on Instagram.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. It's so funny because like those things become so overwhelming, that you take no action. You know what I mean? Like it's exhausting. It's just too much.
Yeah. And that's really kind of the essence of, I think, a lot of the Tip Tuesdays, the workshops and all that, I don't want people to leave that or leave, just regardless if it's a 90-minute workshop or a Tip Tuesday, feeling overwhelmed. And I think a lot of times it's basically like these action points of like, you're going to create your own vibe with it. Like, you're going to take that information and hopefully then make it applicable to you, because that's when you're actually going to do it. If I was giving you like this step-by-step formula where you can't deviate, you can't make it your own recipe, people don't have ownership and then they don't do it. Right. And it's overwhelming. So I think it's more these like guided things where then someone can, like you said, like, oh yeah, I got an AM one. That's great. PM one. Oh, I'm going to have to think about that. But you're going to put your flavor to it. It's not like you have to make your PM bookend sitting in silence with a cup of this specific tea. Like,
no, okay. Right. Which drives me crazy. And then you peel it back and there's an affiliate link for the tea. And there's the affiliate link for the pillow.
Riz's meditation album was a great link for that.
Oh my God.
What was that? Tazo or
RZA,
something.
The old RZA rapper. He has a meditation series, which is absolutely breathtaking. It's
we wanted to
make fun of it so badly.
You can't flaw it. All the basic principles in 6 different tracks.
But it was sponsored by Tazo Tea. Like at the end, the whole thing was funded by it, and I'm like, okay, so I'm on the fence about this one because it's so unbelievably, like, shockingly good compared to what I thought it was going to be.
With Wu-Tang
playing in the background. It was crazy. I'm like, yeah, it was nuts. It was fun, but it was so much fun to watch and be like,
I listened to it twice after we got off that show. I was in the hot tub listening to it going,
you can't imagine how much we were rolling up our sleeves. We're like, I can't wait to
we're ready. We're going to rip them apart.
Dismantle this thing. And like, I'm like, I got nothing, man. I mean, this is amazing. But yeah, I mean, it's the sponsored thing is another thing. And I know we didn't get into that here, but like one of the things I do also like about Tip Tuesday is it's not Instagram slanted, right? Like it's not meant to sell a thing, right? It's not meant to get an affiliate link from someone. And I feel like that's where the muddy waters get introduced to the system, right? Yeah. It's like, or even more so, you look at like a Ben Greenfield, who we like to make fun of all the time here because of his affiliateness. But, 2019, it'll be like all in on this thing. And it's like, oh, I do it 23 hours a day and blah, blah, blah. And then like when his affiliate cycle changes, now all of a sudden it's a completely different product. Like it's a whole new thing. Right? So like, what do you actually want to do? Is it this or is it that? Or is it, and it's for people.
And it's never, hey, I've seen some more research and I think this is a better method. It is literally like, oh yeah, I do this too.
Right. Like, and I add it. Like,
you know?
Well, if we're keeping a running tab, now you're at 39 hours a day, and this is just getting a little crazy. Yeah, right.
And I get 8 to 10 hours a night every night.
Yeah, right. 100%. All right. Well, we could talk about this all day. Thank you so much for coming by. I appreciate it. We really dig this topic a lot, so I'm glad.
Oh yeah. Before, is there a way people can get in touch with you?
Oh yeah, sure. So, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. That's really the only social. I am on Instagram, but they can get a hold of me that way. My website is just leahmarone.com.
And we'll post all that.
Yeah. And I mean, those are the best ways. My email's on there too. And I'm more than happy to, connect.
Love it. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time again, and have a wonderful weekend.
No, you too. It's been awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Take care.
Be subversive, irreverent.
Health is wealth, but you knew that.
Everybody knows that.
But so is following us on social media at Irreverent Health. And check out our website for more exclusive content at irreverenthealth.com.
Oh, I like this.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Irreverent Health.